So I'm jumping in the shed midweek because we have something of a specialist show. We have a special teams player, a kindly vet that may not have the availability of some of the freelance bums on the panel and the influencers, etc., because he has a real grown-up job and everything. But whenever we can get hold of history buff and racing expert Chris Catman Turner, I take the chance to do so. Hello, Chris.
Hey, Spanners. It's great to catch up. And, this break in the middle of the F1 season actually gives us a real opportunity here to have a look back at history and see what we can glean and who we think are the unsung heroes of F1.
Don't you defend F1's calendar. Don't you defend F1 giving us a summer break and then immediately a mini summer break. But you're absolutely right. When we have the off season, say in winter, actually some of our favourite content that we do that no one listens to is the winter content. So we get a mini winter autumn break, and today we're going to look back at a driver and look into their career. It's a format that I love. So who are we picking first to look back upon?
So we are picking the driver that everybody loved to hate, and certainly if you're from the Lewis Hamilton camp, we're picking on Nico Rosberg. And today, Spanners, I'm going to argue with you that he is the GOAT of one-time world champions.
I don't like it. You're going to argue that Nico Rosberg is the greatest ever one-time world champion. It's an honoured kind of category, the one-time world champion. You've done a list for me. It's not a list I've ever thought about, but there are some great names on there. I will address your love to hate thing, because I think if you quote unquote hate a driver that's gone up against your favourite driver, I'm a Lewis fan, then already you're giving them a lot of credit. So, look at the baddies, the pantomime villains I've had in my time supporting F1. And, we're talking the likes of Schumacher, Verstappen, Vettel, Rosberg. I think Rosberg definitely falls into that camp. He was definitely my pantomime villain in the Rosberg-Hamilton years.
Absolutely. And the thing about these guys is it makes more drama, more excitement. You wouldn't be watching if it was just a walkover for your guy. I mean, you'd be happy, but you wouldn't necessarily tune in every day because you get that drama. You're not sure that Lewis is going to beat Rosberg. He was close enough to run him ragged. So that's what made those 2014 to 2016 super exciting, when it could have been a walkover because Mercedes was so far ahead. It was unbelievable.
Well, it could have been Schumacher-esque. It could also have been Verstappen 22-23, or it could have been Hamilton 19-20. So absolutely, Nico Rosberg, it was a fair fight. So I think, and I don't want to preempt your content here, I think Nico Rosberg's career is going to be defined in that 3 years against Lewis Hamilton. And it was largely a fair fight. Ironically, he was furthest away in performance from Hamilton in 2016, I think, when he ultimately ended up winning the title. But let's pick a fight about your first premise, that he's the greatest ever one-time world champion.
Okay, so there's 17 one-time F1 champions to choose from. So quite a few. I think there were a lot of one-time wonders here. So the pick of the bunch, we got John Surtees, 1964. He was a legend on 4 and 2 wheels. Don't forget, he was winning motorbike championships and F1 championships as well. He won for Ferrari. Then we got James Hunt, who was a legend off the track, sometimes on it as well, I guess. We had that amazing battle with Niki Lauda, although you might contest that if Niki didn't have his major accident, Hunt probably wouldn't have won that year.
I was going to say, do you want to argue about all these in one go or as you go? So let's argue about them as you go.
Okay.
So James Hunt, we could definitely do another episode on James Hunt and break that down. I wasn't watching at the time, so I'm going by the documentary Rush for most of my...
Highly accurate, unbiased.
Well, I don't know. So I don't know how much of the 70s F1 you've actually sat and watched. Was Rush a good representation of what happened?
I imagine so. That's what I'm going on. Yeah, I haven't watched much of it. I've seen a couple of season reviews every now and again, but yeah, Rush and that sort of thing, dramatization, sure. Yeah. But I guess you look at the people around it and see whether they had input from the leading guys at the time, and they were quite involved in the planning and were happy with the outcome. So
you and I were both born of the 80s, so it's hard to have an opinion going back beyond that. I think anything back of Mansell, I'm struggling to really form a natural opinion of it. But John Surtees came from a time, I think when you say he was able to win championships on motorbikes and in cars, which would probably be impossible now. So you go, well, that's how unspecialized things were back then. So I'm not going to count either Surtees or Hunt. Surtees based on how long ago it was, and Hunt based on the documentary Rush.
Excellent. Although I would have loved to have seen what a Valentino Rossi could have done in the Ferrari in like 2006 when he tested for them.
Or Hamilton on a superbike. But I think the chances that that you would be elite at both levels is much less than it is for in the 60s.
Absolutely. And speaking of multidisciplinary, you then move on to Mario Andretti from 1978. For our American listeners, he won races in F1, in kart or IndyCar back then, including the Indy 500. He won in sports cars and in NASCAR. So your favorite discipline at the moment, Spanners, with the Daytona 500.
Oh my goodness! Did you see Talladega?
Yeah,
I think it's worth, if you Google Talladega, the big one from Sunday night, there was a 28 car pileup. So yes, I am enjoying my NASCAR. Thank you.
Absolutely. And he also won a Pikes Peak challenge as well. So he's pretty decent in whatever he turns his hand to. And of course, his family dynasty is trying to break back into F1 again. So good luck to them on that. I think they'll be great if they do make it through.
I'm going to give Rosberg the edge on all three so far.
Okay. Now, the next one is your favourite and one you alluded to earlier on, Nigel Mansell.
I can't believe it. All right, okay. When you said to me, Rosberg, I'm going to make the argument he's the greatest ever one-time world champion, obviously Nigel Mansell comes to my head. I'm like, okay, I really want to defend Mansell in this battle. Not that we're going to spend like ages dwelling on the non-Rosberg people, but Mansell was involved in a lot of title fights. Rosberg had his kind of one era where they had a dominant car and he had 3 stabs at it. Mansell could easily have been a multiple world champion. Rosberg was spawny, I think, to get that one in 2016. So I'm not giving you Mansell.
Okay, fair enough. What? So Mansell was close in 3 years. So in 1986, he should have won. That was the year of the tyre failure in Australia when he was on course to win it. He was in 1987 as well when he was injured in the last couple of races, so he wasn't able to take the title to Piquet. And in 1991, of course, the year before his actual victory, he had a lot of unreliability that year. And of course, the famous Canada mishap where he was waving to the crowd and knocked it out of gear.
What actually happened there? So let's explain what he just knocked it out of gear, and that was enough to break the car.
So it was coming out of the bottom hairpin. There's the big grandstands all around there. So he had his arm out the cockpit, waving to the crowd. And I think his elbow, because don't forget they had a stick shift back then rather than flappy paddles. So he knocked it out of gear, and then something happened where that then disengaged the gearbox completely, and he couldn't get it back into gear. So as he's kind of cruising and trundling down the straight, all the other cars barrel past him, and that's it. This was the last lap, so he had literally just to put his foot down and he would have made it over the line, because there weren't the same sort of chicanes back then either. So yeah, that was pretty embarrassing.
All right, so I'm not okay. So here's the thing: I can disagree now, and then you're going to make the case for Rosberg, and we can revisit it at the end. But no, for me, El Lion-O equal to Rosberg, not for me. Thank you.
Well, okay, last little bit on Mansell then. So he was an amazing driver on his day, but he was so inconsistent, and he could psych himself out when he wasn't psyching his teammate out or his rivals out. He was very prone to the overthink and the team politics getting in the way. That's why he failed when he was at Ferrari, because he came up against Prost and they had horrendous battles with each other. And that's why he retired in the end, because Prost was signing back for Williams to come in for 93. And he said, no, thank you. I'm not doing that again. I'm out. So yeah, I think he would have, he was brilliant in the car, but I think as a complete package, he was fragile, shall we say. But don't get me wrong, I grew up with Mansell. I've got a picture around here somewhere on my wall of him. I love the man. And he's what got me into Formula One. But I think Rosberg, on balance, for the sake of this podcast, I'm going to argue that he was better.
I'm kind of angry at you right now, so let's move on for a little while.
Okay, cool. You got Damon Hill then. So I think we can move fairly swiftly past Damon again.
Sorry, Damon. A hero at the time. It was definitely the whole country was behind him. But I think no one's going to argue that, he's had the overall quality compared to he wasn't a Mansell.
No, he wasn't a Mansell or a Rosberg. Then we got a bit of a gap to Kimi Räikkönen. So Kimi, I think he probably won the title. That was in 2007, Lewis's first year, don't forget. So this was probably when Kimi was arguably at his worst, I would say. I think he checked out by this point and he lucked into a title when Alonso and Hamilton took points off each other.
Well, I think we add Kimi Raikkonen to the list of Chris Catman Turner people as well, because people are going to argue with you, but I agree. So I'm happy to put Rosberg above Raikkonen.
He did do a lot in his McLaren days against Schumacher and Montoya, that sort of thing. But I think he wasn't dedicated enough, which is where Rosberg takes the edge on a lot of these guys, as he was super focused on getting that victory, particularly in 2016. So, yeah, I think Kimi was just too chill for F1. And then the final one is Jensen Button, I think, in 09. So, don't forget, he's the winner of the longest race in F1 history. Let's not forget that.
Canada 2011, really.
There you go.
Never comes up.
Yeah. And obviously, so what's seen is lucky about Jensen's victory is that he won for this new team Brawn. But let's not forget that that's born out the ashes of Honda, which he was driving for the last few years. They put a huge investment in, and he'd had a lot of development into that car. So a lot of that success was actually down to Jensen's development and victory there. So I'm quite happy to give him a lot. And don't forget, Jensen also beat Lewis over 3 years, as everyone keeps harping on about.
Right, okay. So the metric has never been the total amount of points between two teammates. But I will grant you that he was pretty close to Hamilton's level. 2011 was the season that he really he finished second to Vettel. Vettel ran away with it, and he was dominant over Hamilton. But Hamilton was a real low point in his professional and personal life as well. He spent so much time in the headlines, more time in the headlines than the cockpit. So there was some extenuating circumstance over that. I mean, it just makes me laugh that people will pick the total points instead of Hamilton won 2 seasons and Button won 1 season. I mean, there's cherry picking. And then there's cherry picking. It's almost one of those arguments where you go, when people go, oh, more points over the 3 years, you go, okay, you're not arguing in good faith, because you would never go, no other teammate partnership do they talk about the total points over there, to justify it. No, that is a pure kind of trying to put down Hamilton statistic. But the point is, Jensen Button was good enough to hang with Hamilton, good enough to hang with Alonso, and won a championship as well, all in 3 different eras in 3 different cars. And I think that says an awful lot. And I think it remains for you to establish that Rosberg has that credentials outside of that battle with Hamilton.
Okay, so I can certainly do that. And if you've got another metric hour, shall we say, then we can talk about
Well, like
that.
I said, I'm determined we are not going to go over an hour anymore for these things. All right, so I think we're going to get into your justification for Rosberg being better than all of the people we mentioned there. But I think a little bit about, does anybody not know who Nico Rosberg is, who retired in 2016? I suppose if you're a Drive to Survive convert, then you'll never have seen Nico Rosberg race. That's an interesting point to us. We go, of course, they might just know him as the outspoken Sky pundit who wasn't allowed into the ground for a couple of years for some reason because of his amazing immune system.
Yeah, exactly. So good old Nico Rosberg. Yeah, so he is the son of Keke Rosberg, who was a champion. He's actually a Finnish world champion, but Nico initially actually raced under a Finnish racing license and then changed to a German one when he decided it would be better for sponsorship. And Nico started off life in F1, actually even before that, with Lewis Hamilton in Formula 3 at the same team and in karting as well. And they then moved to F1, and Nico actually beat Lewis to F1. He got there quicker than Lewis did, and he started off with Williams.
So what people may not know, actually, thinking about it, is so obvious if you were watching it in the teens, is that Hamilton and Rosberg were great friends growing up. So they did a lot of karting together. Rosberg, obviously, I think you would argue, had a little more money, had the world champion father. So not calling
they actually set up the team for Lewis to be in. So it was
really,
it was the team Rosberg, which then morphed into Mercedes McLaren Racing, or whatever it was called, Mercedes-Benz McLaren.
What formula?
It was that was in go-karting,
right?
And then they did race against each other in F3, but they weren't in the same team. They actually crashed in Macau at the same corner, on the same lap, but not with each other, if that makes sense. They kind of crashed despite each other. So that was odd. But yeah, so they had a bit of a battle. Hamilton generally came out on top in their junior formula. He did beat him in that karting era. But as you said, sometimes the money talks, and Rosberg was the youngest person ever at the time to drive a Formula One car when he tested for Williams. And then when he joined up with Williams in 06, he was seen as a hot shoe and joined alongside Mark Webber in that team.
So he partners Mark Webber in that.
Yes.
So he's seen as, I don't know what this term hot shoe.
Yeah, it just means that he's a generational talent,
right.
And he's seen as the next big thing to come along, like Lewis was, but a few years earlier. If
that's
that makes
funny
sense.
Because from my perspective, these are the Schumacher domination years. I don't remember a big fuss about Rosberg.
Oh, interesting. Well, he was definitely touted as a young gun because he was coming in very, very young to a team, and coming into Williams, of course, who were on the downward trend, unfortunately, at this point, because they'd lost some of their star drivers and Adrian Newey, of course. So they were starting to slip a little bit, and they were looking for new talent to try and bolster them back up the grid. And Nico Rosberg was seen as very fast and also very, very technical. There's a test that the Williams team do, their Williams Engineering Aptitude Test, which is they give to their drivers, and it's about how well they can understand the car and relay that to their engineers. And he scored the highest ever that they've ever had in there. So, looking at all of these guys, Mansell, all those guys, he beat them on that. So there was a lot of excitement around his career coming in. And in the first race he ever debuted in, there was the Bahrain Grand Prix in 2006. And he was the youngest driver ever to get the fastest lap until Max Verstappen came along, of course. And he finished one place behind his more experienced teammate, Mark Webber, although I must say he did make a rather clumsy error into the first corner and clattered into Heidfeld and ruined his race.
So in retrospect, going back, do we think Mark Webber is a benchmark going in?
I would say so. Yeah, so don't forget he was relatively young at the time as well, but Mark Webber developed into a title contender. He was nearly won in 2010.
Yeah, he was in the running. Let's calm down. He's in the running in 2010.
He was in the running, and he was up against Vettel and Alonso, and those are no slouches that we're talking about there. So, and he's obviously had a good career in other disciplines as well. So I would say he's a tier 2 driver. If we're going, tier 1 is Vettel, Hamilton, Alonso. He's very close by. I would put Rosberg in that tier 2 along with Webber and Button and those sorts of guys. That's going to be controversial in itself. But yeah, so he was very fast. But unfortunately, at the Williams years, so 2006, 2009, the car was very unreliable. And Webber left in the end of 2006, which left Rosberg to be the team leader with like Kazuki Nakajima and Alex Wirtz and that sort of thing. So, those guys we'll go with Wirtz for a start. He's obviously had years and years of testing experience with McLaren, so one of the most experienced drivers on the grid. And he comprehensively trounced him. So, there's definitely raw talent there.
But here, if we want to sow the seeds of the Rosberg-Hamilton friendship-ending disaster that was 2014, 2015, 2016, if you look at this period where, okay, Rosberg is now against Wirtz in the Williams, which I don't remember setting the world alight during those years. They got a podium, though, didn't they, in 2007?
Yeah, they did. Yeah, they were frequently getting in the points. He was beating his teammate comprehensively. The focus very much in those years was because don't forget Ferrari and McLaren were so far ahead of everybody else that they were mopping up the rest of the points paying positions. So the spotlight really wasn't on them, but he was getting good praise from the people around him for kind of generally being there or thereabouts, the best of the rest. When there were positions to pick up, podiums to pick up, he would pick them.
But then if you go, you look at Hamilton, who he'd been ferrying around the world, and he's having the support of the Rosbergs in that 2007 car, immediately getting race wins, fighting for championships, and then 2008 rolls around, and you're still fighting Nakajima in the Williams, and Hamilton's picking up a world title. Could the seeds of of envy and frustration have been sown at that point?
Well, they certainly could have been, but there's an interesting twist to that tale in that 2008, Rosberg could have partnered Lewis at McLaren because there was an explosive rivalry between Alonso and Hamilton in 2007. Alonso leaves in a huff to go back to his previous, his Enstone
Renault?
team,
Yeah.
where they were welcoming him with open arms. And Lewis was there as a team leader, and they were looking for somebody to join. And McLaren, Ron Dennis, approached Frank Williams with a £22 million offer, which is huge money in that time. Not as much as the Spygate fine, of course, but they approached him with a huge amount of money to take Rosberg off their hands to partner Lewis in 2008.
So it could have happened all like earlier. So they could have. The thing is, though, neither of them win that title in 2008 if they're taking points off each other. Hamilton had no threat from Kovalainen, so they end up going with Kovalainen. God, that could have been so different then.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that would have been a Massa title all the way through, wouldn't it? Because, as you say, if Hamilton and Rosberg were taking points off each other, Kovalainen, interestingly, was the guy that Rosberg beat to the GP2 title quite convincingly as well. So it was odd to see Kovalainen getting the high-powered F1 seat before Rosberg.
So how come Rosberg didn't get the seat then?
Williams said no. And Rosberg graciously went, "Oh, okay, I'll stay with you, and as long as you give me a competitive car at the end of my contract." But Frank Williams basically said, "You're not taking my team leading driver off me, even with a huge amount of money," which I don't know if that was the right decision for Williams, to be honest with you, because they, as I say, they started really tumbling down the order. Maybe some money with somebody like a Kovalainen leading their team might have worked for them.
Yeah, Williams, though, again, speaking to people who have come in the last 4 or 5 years, they weren't always a backmarker team. I don't know how to get that across to people. Like Williams were great when we're talking about Mansell's titles, Damon Hill, Ayrton Senna. These are all Williams drivers. They were one of the very top teams, and a team that most Brits in their late 30s and 40s. Don't actually know how old you are, Catman. 38.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
So a lot of our age people basically are massive Williams fans, and we had to watch this crippling fall down the grid. I guess this was almost like the beginning of the major slide. This was the beginning of the no way back.
It was 2009 when they failed to capitalize on that car having the double diffuser, being the third best team, because the ones who had it were Braun, Toyota, and Williams. But they just didn't have the money. They had no really big sponsors. They couldn't develop through the season, and so that was the end of Rosberg's time at Williams because they weren't able to keep up with the development rate.
And just a brief one on Williams, because there was definitely a downward spiral, but then there was a brief period of like hope when the hybrids came in, and the Mercedes had such a big advantage that if you had a Mercedes engine, you were basically one of the top 3 teams, and Williams were able to basically build a car with no aero. It seemed like it was just a series of rocket launches, and they were able to just be this rocket ship with no drag. And I think, did they not finish second in that championship 2014?
Oh, I think so. It was at races like Austria where there's no corners and it just accelerate, hard braking, accelerate again.
Yeah.
They got pole positions there, and that period at Williams is what got Bottas the drive when, spoiler alert, Rosberg retires.
Yeah.
So that because he was able to defeat Massa in that car and show what he could do.
And Bottas got a P2 in that season. I know he didn't get a win, did he? But he did get a P2. No. He got a couple of podiums. Right. So, that was what made him the rising star. That is interesting, isn't it? So we've got Rosberg then. I think 2009, obviously he's thumping Nakajima. Yep. Then the big move. This would be the prequel in the Star Wars type thing. If episode 4, 5, and if A New Hope is 2014, then this is, I've forgotten what the prequels were called.
Oh, Phantom Menace.
Yeah, there you go. This is the Phantom Menace now.
Although, if you're a Star Wars geek, bear me out here. So I think the prequels would build on what would make the 4, 5, and 6 great. So that's how this goes. So when he moves, so Braun are selling out at the end of 2009 because they have no money, and they bought it for £1 and they sold it for a lot more than that. Ross Brawn's doing well out of this. And Mercedes come along and they want to heavily invest and make their own team. and they want a German super team, right? So they've got Mercedes. They hire Rosberg as their main driver. And initially, they have Nick Heidfeld in that second seat until a certain guy called Michael Schumacher, who had been retired for 3 years, and he'd had a little inkling of wanting to come back with Ferrari the previous year when Massa had his awful accident. And he was only prevented from doing that because of a shoulder injury he sustained from. Yeah, he was playing around with
so Schumacher
motorbikes.
Could have come back way earlier.
Yeah. So yeah, absolutely. So he did a lot of kind of motorbike track days and that sort of thing, and racing in kind of black liveries and black overalls so that you wouldn't notice who he was in kind of lower motorbike.
No, he never
formally.
did that.
Yeah,
this is Michael Schumacher, 7-time world champion, absolutely ruined the noughties for me. He turned F1 into a nap sport. So for me, in my 20s, when I did used to go out, and I'd have a shandy, you know, when I went out on a Friday and Saturday night, and then you catch the F1, and then, Schumacher's off in the distance again. And then wake up with the start and go, did anything change? Nope. Okay, good.
Nope, he's about half a minute ahead of everybody else.
Oh, yeah, if he lap the field at will. So this return then, now this is one of the key things I think that boosts Rosberg's reputation. And as a point that's on my mind, so I want to spit it out, which is Schumacher didn't actually compare that well to Rosberg.
No,
if my memory is correct. And actually, I think in his final year, he was having like silly accidents with I think he had one with Kobayashi, and just seemed to demonstrate actually a little bit of a lack of spatial awareness, almost as if he was a middle-aged man in Formula One, which is So he said it wasn't the same Schumacher as in the peak. I don't think so, and I don't think there's a surprise there. But he did the thing that Rosberg now does about Hamilton when he was being interviewed afterwards. And he was bigging up Rosberg of like, we all know how quick Rosberg is now. Now you see what I was up against. Because if I was to struggle against Rosberg, he must be incredible. But I do think that was I think Schumacher fans, I bet they're not happy with that return.
I was a big Schumacher fan. I know that he turned into a snooze fest and beat our British guys, but I loved Michael Schumacher. I thought he was brilliant. And I enjoyed watching him come back, but as you say, you kind of have a tinge of disappointment when you're expecting so much. That pole position lap that never was in Monaco that he did in 2012, right at the end. So he should have had the pole position, and probably if he'd got it, would have got the victory if he hadn't had, as you said, ploughed into the back of a Williams in Spain the previous race and then got a grid penalty for the following race. Everybody go to YouTube and watch that lap, because that is how you drive in Monaco.
I thought you were talking about the lap this was in a Mercedes. The qualify. He did another qualifying lap where he had pole, I think. And then
that was in 06 in a Ferrari, and he decided to. Alonso was going to beat his time, so he parked it at the final corner.
Oh my God!
He just forgot to turn and went, oh no, I've blocked the track. Never mind.
That one was more blatant than Rosberg's one, where he caused the yellow by accidentally going into the runoff area and then immediately reversing back down onto the track to force a yellow flag.
Yeah.
The Schumacher one was more blatant, and he was given a grid penalty. I think it was pit lane start, or no?
Yeah, it was pit lane start for that. Yeah, absolutely. So he was definitely caught out with that and contributed to...
Here's the thing. I know we're talking about Rosberg, but like Schumacher did not mind a good cheat. He didn't mind a cheat at all.
No, not at all. He would win at any cost was Michael Schumacher. And I think Rosberg took some of that learnings when he was partnered with him at Mercedes and put those to good use through the following years. I'm sure we'll get into the whose fault is it for various incidents.
So with Rosberg, though, you go, right, Rosberg, absolutely ruthless operator. There's none of the... Like, he was not hindered by a sense of fairness that I think sometimes holds Lewis Hamilton back as well. No, he was definitely, I think as well, a win at all costs kind of guy.
Absolutely. There's a really interesting anecdote that Rosberg told on I think one of the F1 podcasts, where Schumacher was they were waiting for qualifying at Monaco, and Schumacher was in the bathroom. There's only one bathroom in the Mercedes garage, and Schumacher was in there, and Rosberg desperately needed to go before going out into qualifying. And Schumacher was sitting there taking his merry time, and Rosberg was banging on the door saying, "Let me in, I've got to go." And Schumacher walks out with 1 minute to go, going, "Oh, sorry, I didn't know you were there." It's just the level of mind games that they played.
There's a press conference that's an absolute classic that you've got to find, and they pranked Nico Rosberg. So he's got one of those little microphones that you have in the press conference, and it's already like blowing out the microphone. It's already really over, kind of, because it's too close. And Schumacher leans over to Vettel and goes, tell him he has to move it closer. So Vettel kind of moves it closer, and Rosberg's like, "Oh, sorry," moves it closer and starts really blowing out the mic in this press conference. Well, Webber is in the background, absolutely creasing up. That's well worth searching. If I can find that, I'll put a link in the show notes. But yeah, he definitely didn't seem to mind pranking Rosberg.
Absolutely. And, Lewis and Rosberg's battles later on, Nico said that he had to step up the mind games to put Lewis out of his comfort zone to make sure that he wasn't at his best, so that Nico could capitalize on those mistakes. So he definitely learned a lot in the Schumacher era. And let's not forget, as you rightly said, Rosberg comprehensively beat Schumacher over all 3 seasons, and in each season together, before you get at that.
What about the total points? Who won the total points?
So total points, he got 324 versus 197.
Oh, wow. Yeah, no, it was comprehensive. And the thing is, Schumacher wasn't consistent, like I said, like getting into incidents. And so really then with Schumacher then retiring properly, this is now Nico Rosberg leading a team that is about to become the most dominant force in F1, possibly in history. And it's all ordained. He's the son of a champion. He's been training for this his whole life. Surely from here, nothing can go wrong.
And he's got his best mate sat in the car next to him. So surely, it's a match made in heaven.
But that wasn't supposed to be Hamilton either at first, going to Mercedes in 2013. And remember, 2013 was still a dominant Red Bull year.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. So, this is the Vettel, kneeling down in front of his car, praising it as he was winning something ridiculous number of races on the trot. Nobody could touch him. And...
So, I mean, we're reminiscing here, these are the points of these shows. Back in the olden days, so the 2013 season was really interesting for the fact that I think Red Bull were in a little bit of trouble in the first few races, and they just could not get on with a new tyre compound. And then because the teams were just going, okay, we can get more life out of these tyres if we swap them over. So if we put the right on the left and the left on the right, it's wearing in different places. This will be good. But what that was doing was it was just straining the side wall where it connects to the main tyre so much, it was just exploding. So I was there. I was at the grandstands at Village. So turn 3 at Silverstone, 2013. Wow. Yeah, I was stood there. And so I saw all the explosions. I saw Lewis Hamilton's went, I think, at turn 4 as he went around the loop back onto the Wellington Straight. And all the tyres and everything were just exploding in front of us. And I think Vettel ended up having an engine failure. And you know what, Catman? Everybody else around me booed. And I just stood there tutting at everyone going, can't believe you would boo someone for having an engine failure. Unbelievable. Oh, yeah. Everyone else. It was all the other kids. It wasn't me.
Of course you
were. so that was a fascinating season because, that then Red Bull said, oh, no, it's not safe now. It's not safe to have these tyres. So they had the new tyre wall, and lo and behold, all their aerodynamics worked. And I don't think they lost another one after that.
It was no, absolutely. They went on a trot and won the rest of the season.
It was very upsetting.
But in 2013, then, so Rosberg took 2 wins, including that one at Silverstone.
Yeah.
In 2013, so he took 2 wins to Hamilton's 1.
What one did Hamilton win? Hungary.
Good question.
Look at this. Interesting.
I know that Rosberg won at Monaco and at Silverstone. So that's another string to Rosberg's bow in that he's the GOAT. Let's not forget we're talking about him being the GOAT. He won 3 times at Monaco.
3 times at Monaco. One of those wins was a gift. I can't remember which one it was. There was one where Hamilton was cruising home and they messed up the pit stops.
Maybe. But he also, one of those was also, he didn't get punished for his infraction on the qualifying. So he managed to win from pole position on that one.
There's no doubt, is there? Like, he definitely cheated on purpose, caused the yellow flag to stop Hamilton getting the pole.
Yeah, definitely. He didn't. I don't know why they didn't look back at it more strongly. There was a lot of accusations of cheating there. I think he just either didn't brake enough, didn't turn off, or made it lock up to look like he was trying to do something.
It was the reversing, Chris. It was he put it in reverse and went back.
Yeah, just to make sure that it was in a very dangerous position. Yeah, exactly. They had to throw the yellows just as it was
something that we've missed there is, wasn't there a chance that would be De Resta in that seat, Paul De Resta?
Oh, I don't remember that one, but I think that would have been not as good a choice as Rosberg, shall we say?
No, instead of Hamilton.
Oh, instead of Hamilton.
I think. Oh, wow. What have I got in my head that De Resta was lined up for that?
Well, he's quite a Mercedes man, isn't he? Because he raced for Force India with the Mercedes engine, and then he went to DTM, I think, and was Mercedes for them. So yeah, he was quite a Mercedes guy. But I don't know if he'd not shown quite enough. It was so to go to to go back to Singapore the previous year when Lewis was looking like he was a title contender until an engine failure. That sounds
another.
Oh.
Yeah. So that McLaren in 2012 was quick, but just couldn't stay in one piece.
No, exactly. And both of the drivers there, were in a shell of the title if it wasn't for falling apart and pit stop problems every 5 seconds. So yeah, he was furious with that unreliability after Singapore, and he was approached by Niki Lauda from Mercedes, who then convinced him that his project was the right one to go for.
Madness.
Yeah, exactly.
Joe Saywood, Uncle Joe said, terrible decision.
Absolutely. Everyone at the time said it was a terrible decision because, obviously leaving McLaren, who've been on top for many, many years, since the 90s, they've been there or thereabouts. And Mercedes, yes, they had the Brawn legacy, but they weren't competitive anymore because they hadn't properly been able to develop that first car. So it dropped back. And they were having huge problems with tyre wear, whereas they would be on pole position, but then be out of the points within the first 10 laps because they would just churn through.
Well, that was
tires.
2013. That was happening an awful lot, wasn't it? They were getting pole by maybe a second at times, and then they would fall down the grid.
Absolutely. And interesting, in 2013, Rosberg had the qualifying advantage on the man who's got the most pole positions ever in F1. So on average, he qualified faster than Lewis by about 0.1 seconds per lap. Now, admittedly, that reversed to the other way around, 0.1 seconds less than Lewis from 2014 to 2016. So we're talking fine margins here. But yeah, he still beat him in that 2013 season.
Did he? All right. That's funny, isn't it? Funny how your memory plays tricks on you. So it was two each in their 4 seasons together.
Exactly. Yeah, there you go. Across their... we'll not go into that.
So look, I think we all agree Lewis Hamilton is good. He's quite good at F1, isn't he? Like, he's undoubtedly fast. He's demonstrated some of the most outstanding race pace in F1 history, especially with these Pirelli tyres where that's so important. And Nico Rosberg really, really gave Hamilton a week in, week out headache. With the caveat that from 2014, 15, 16, if you didn't beat your teammate as a Mercedes driver, you were guaranteed second place, which kind of made the championship a bit weird. So Hamilton could absolutely thump him for 3 races. And if Rosberg, nicked it for 3 races, the points difference was the same. Whereas if that had been in a Bottas 1920 situation, I don't feel like the gap to Bottas was so different, but Bottas would get punished a lot more for being off the pace. Like, the field would swallow him up. So this is one of the arguments that I've long maintained, is that if the field had been closer, Rosberg might have struggled more.
Possibly, although you would see even in the races where Mercedes did have an advantage with Bottas, he wasn't able to keep up during the stints with Lewis, whereas
Rosberg was.
Rosberg could and take it to him, and sometimes on his day trounce him. Although we'll move through 2014. That's 2014. I would say 2014 was great. We had the duel in the desert in Bahrain.
That's the first one I was going to mention. Yeah.
Some of the best racing I have ever seen and will ever see. We'll put a link to that in the show notes too, because it was just phenomenal, the two of them. So context here. So late in the race, there's a safety car and both drivers have fresh tyres on and they've got the field right behind them. So they decide to blast away from the field as the safety car comes out and actually show quite how dominant that car was, because by the second lap, there was nobody else in sight. Absolutely nobody else. And they were going at it, hammer and tongs, diving at each other lap after lap. And eventually Hamilton comes out on top. Now, I must say, this is the cleanest fight that they ever had. And I must say, though, Rosberg did come out second on this one. He could be seen as a little bit possibly clumsy in wheel-to-wheel battles with Lewis.
No, so you see where I was saying the ruthless element, it didn't, when it came to side-by-side, action, and it came to bashing wheels, actually Hamilton was much the aggressor between the two. So if I'm remembering this rightly in Bahrain, it was finally decided by quite an aggressive chop across the nose that made Rosberg bail out. Now, I think if that was today, we accept somehow horribly that the inside car can just run the outside car off track. I hate that. But that was not the case then. And Hamilton did it to Rosberg again in Montreal. I think perhaps I think that might have been in 2014 as well. And would just basically, run him off track, be very, very aggressive in that way. So in that way, that's maybe where Rosberg was a little timid. In fact, it happened a few times to the point that when we were podcasting about it, I was saying, I want Rosberg to hold his ground occasionally. Let Hamilton clatter into him and crash, because then it would be Hamilton's fault. But you could legitimately argue in Montreal and in Bahrain, because Rosberg got out of the way and went, oh, blimey, he's just going to wipe me out, and got out of the way. Technically, Hamilton drove into a space where there was no car. So you go, oh, it's okay. So I kept wanting Rosberg to hold his ground, let Lewis clatter him. And this is as a Hamilton fan, just so we know, because that's the rule. If he'd held his ground and Hamilton just wipes him out, Hamilton's going to get penalised.
Yeah. And you could see that because he was losing out in those battles in 2015 and 2016, he started to up the ante with how he was sticking his nose in. So let's go to Spa.
Yes. And sorry, I'm playing a little game in my head of, can I predict where Catman's going to go next? I mentioned Spa on a recent Grand Prix with Cadence, show with Cadence and Chris, when I was talking about watching it with my wife's grandfather and surprising him about how angry I got at Rosberg sticking his nose in and causing a puncture.
Yeah, it was totally Rosberg's fault. And, in the whose fault it is here. So we went up halfway up the outside and just kind of hung it round, and it's a right-left chicane. And when the left comes, he's got his tiny bit of his front wing next to Lewis's rear wheel and just straight up punctures it. Yes, Rosberg gets some damage as well, but Rosberg, I think, almost admitted that it was deliberate from him, so that because he was generally seen as the weaker in battle, and he wanted to assert his position.
Well, there you go. Yeah, that was the wrong one to do it, though, because that was just leaving your nose in.
Yeah, exactly. And afterwards they had crisis meetings, and Toto said this is not to happen again. Well, that shows how well that went. So I guess if you're looking at that one, I want to move on to 2015. Hamilton absolutely dominated Rosberg. He won 10 races versus 6, although those only 3 of Rosberg's victories were before Lewis took the title in the USA, and then Lewis basically switched off, didn't he? And so you could see it as 10-3. So he absolutely destroyed Rosberg. And as you say, he was much more aggressive. He was more switched on, and he had to elevate his game to beat Rosberg, which is another reason why he's so amazing, because you get the best Lewis out of this. So coming then into 2016, which is obviously where he gets his title, and we can have a huge debate on this one, because I think many people, including you, I imagine, cite that the engine failure was the reason where Lewis retired from the lead in Malaysia. You could say that that's where he lost the title, but I think there's a good few reasons here as to why that wasn't the case.
Okay, but when you're finished, I want to make the case of why that was actually the reason he lost the title.
All right, so there's a few different things. So we briefly touched on the fact that Hamilton switched off at the end of 2015. He let his driving take a back seat and took other things on, and he started not caring so much. And he went off the boil, and he admitted as much. He said that his frame of mind had changed after he won the championship. He said that the intensity of trying to beat Rosberg was really high, and so he needed to enjoy himself for a bit. And I think that gave Rosberg a bit of a run of momentum. And he said, Rosberg said that he was more confident because he was week in, week out beating Lewis. And he actually won 7 on the trot. So 3 at the end of 2015 and 4 at the start of 2016. And that's one of the longest winning streaks of all time. And that was a huge, momentum going into 2016 that Lewis was constantly catching up with. He'd catch up in the points, then he'd have some problem or some failure or whatever, and then he'd have to catch back up again. So, I think that indifference from Hamilton, we'll call it, definitely took the boil off that 2016 championship and made him not as able to cope with that. I think coping with Rosberg, who was super motivated, you can't lose the first 4 races of the season and expect to gain that back up. Even though there was 19 races. Was it 19 or was it 20?
19 sounds right.
19. But, okay. Let's go for that.
So I'm gonna cite Malaysia for that engine failure. Now, it sounds like it's just one race.
Yep.
So, but it's what do you call it? It's a 6-pointer is what you'd call it in soccer, because every point you lose 1 point, your teammate also gains another point.
Yep.
So it's a swing. So they still had that situation in 2016 where Rosberg could be terrible in the race and he would cruise to P2. He would absolutely cruise up to P2. It's guaranteed. So with the Hamilton's fate, so with Hamilton winning a race over Rosberg, you gain 7 points. That's the most you could gain. And so he not only lost the 25 points he was going to get from the win, but he also had the 7-point swing because Rosberg would have finished second in that race, but instead finished first.
Actually, no, he didn't. He finished third in that race. He was having an off day that day because he was due to finish off the podium in 4th.
He had a spin in turn 1. He had a spin in turn 1.
Yeah, and that put him on the back foot. And it wasn't quite as dominant as 2014. So there were episodes where Lewis had a crash in quali at Baku, for example, and he could only get up to P5. Rosberg in Austria, obviously they had their coming together. He ended up in P4. There was a few instances where they weren't 1 and 2. So, but I would say that the reliability wasn't as one-sided as it made out. So yes, that was a big focal point where it's a dramatic drop-off from the victory and a huge point swing. But you could say that, let's go through, for example, which races they all had problems in. So China, Hamilton started from the pit lane after an ERS failure in qualifying. So he started from the back, but he put him on the back foot. He then collided with Felipe Nasr on the first lap, which then put him back again.
Well, don't collide with Felipe Nasr.
And then, so he finished 7th in that race. So, yes, the reliability played an issue there.
Definitely.
So let's take that one out of the equation.
And then wasn't there
Russia as well?
Russia, right?
Yep. Russia. So, again, ERS failure in quali. So, he starts 10th, finishes 2nd. Rosberg wins that one, so you could say that Lewis didn't have the opportunity.
Yeah, but that's a 14-point swing, right?
Exactly.
Because let's assume that he was better that weekend. I don't know why. That suits my narrative. But assume he was on for a win. That's 7 points lost and then 7 points gained for Rosberg. 14-point swing for a reliability issue.
Yeah. Okay. So here we come. So now here comes Rosberg's turn. So Rosberg in Monaco, he had brake issues in the race. He dropped right back to 7th, and Hamilton won that one. In Canada, Rosberg got a slow puncture, so he finished 5th again when Hamilton won it. So these are big point swings in the other direction. You got Silverstone, where Rosberg had a gearbox issue. He finishes 3rd, and Hamilton won. We'll come on to that one because that's a little bit of a niche one. And then at Spa, Hamilton took the back of the grid start for new PU components. But then at Spa, that's a good place to do it because he finished 3rd. But Rosberg won. So again, you can say
and again, so if we assume that he was definitely going to win that weekend, that's a 7 plus 10, that's a 17-point swing.
Yep.
Plus, we go to Malaysia. I'm ignoring the Rosberg gearbox because that doesn't suit my narrative. But the blowout in Malaysia, to me, that's the huge one. So it's a 25-point loss, and Rosberg gets 15 points instead of 12. So we're talking a 30-point swing in a season where generally you could only gain 7 points on your opponent per race. So it was pretty much 4 flat-out race victories, and that left him in the position where he only had to finish P2 behind Hamilton for the rest of the season, and basically didn't have to race. After that, Rosberg did not have to race Hamilton for the rest of the season. Just cruise home in 2nd place, and that's exactly what he did.
Exactly. And I remember you saying at the time that Lewis had to treat each one like a cup final, didn't he? So it was like every race, if I don't win, I might as well go bust. So every race, and he did, to be fair, he absolutely stepped up and smashed him on those.
Yeah, well, that's because I think all season, after the first 4 races, he was just, that was his most dominant performance over Rosberg, which is what makes it all the more, frustrating or great. But also, you had Spain. So Spain 2016. That was 2016, right? Where, I'm sorry, I'm not having it. Rosberg just came across the track and wiped Hamilton out. Now, Hamilton kept his foot in at Spa. And that's one to Google if you haven't seen it. Hamilton Rosberg in Spa 2016. So look, Rosberg just ran him off the road. And so that would have been
that.
You're not having that. Look, so Rosberg had something, he was in the wrong engine mode, something comes down the hill. They're on the straight going up to turn 4. So they finished turn 3, they're on the straight going to turn 4, and Rosberg just fully comes across the track all the way to the point where there was already a car on a straight, forcing Hamilton onto the grass.
Lewis was not alongside him already. And
he was, that's factually incorrect. So there was definitely an overlap.
So you're right. Rosberg was in the wrong mode coming around turn 3. He had the rear red light flashing. Now. So Lewis, it's on that link that I sent you beforehand, and we'll put that in the show notes. It's got all of the flash points between Rosberg and Hamilton. So in Spain, he was in turn 3, so the long right-hander. Rosberg was in the wrong engine mode after out-dragging Lewis down to the first corner. He's coming around there, and his engine is already starting to harvest, so the red light keeps flashing on the back. So Lewis is going, oh, hang on a minute, there's an opportunity here because something's wrong. And he had about a 17 kilometer an hour difference, so we had a big overspeed there. And don't forget, this is in the year where your engineers aren't allowed to come on the radio and tell you that you're in the wrong engine mode. So Rosberg realizes this a little bit too late, clicks it into the right engine mode, and then starts to move to the right. So he's already taking a tighter line at the exit of turn 3. So Lewis is wider than him in his left-hand mirror. Rosberg is already starting to move to the right. Then Lewis dramatically changes position to lunge down the inside because he said that there was a much bigger gap to the inside than the outside. And so Rosberg is, as you say, moves all the way over, but by that point, Lewis then gets, with an overspeed, it's not quite as easy because he's not alongside him and he pushes him off. Rosberg is just moving there and Lewis is diving for a gap that's diminishing. Here we go.
Right, I've got it up on screen now.
Perfect.
Right, it's diminishing, but the car is there when Rosberg moves out. So Hamilton is there, his front wheel is along the rear wheel, and Rosberg, on a straight, bear in mind, simply continues driving over to the right.
Yep. But this is very easy to say this with a still image. Don't forget, as I say, the closing speed is great. What I really like doing is watching that video at half speed, because you start listening to the drivers as they're talking and they sound drunk because they're at half speed. They go, and then I went to the right. But yeah, so Hamilton slides off onto the grass. He keeps his foot in, to be fair.
Hamilton 100% keeps his foot in. And I'm not defending Hamilton for that one. 100% keeps his foot in. If I'm going off, we're both going off.
Exactly. Exactly. So,
Rosberg moves all the way from one set of white lines on the left-hand side all the way to the other. I haven't seen this for years.
Before Lewis does, though.
Yeah, he
starts moving before Lewis does.
Oh, my good God. Anyone who thinks that's above board is... Have you been... What time is it? It's 3 p.m. and this vet is drunk.
Oh dear! I thought I'd come out.
And if you look at it, I've just noticed this. I don't know if I said it at the time. There's also an extra jink. So Rosberg goes from the left-hand side of the track to the right, and then when Hamilton goes for the gap, he then makes a further extra dive down to the right. I'm not having it, Catman. That's the most blatant driving off the track I've ever seen. And yeah, 100% Hamilton keeps his foot in. That's hilarious. Yeah. And then they can't look at each other. They can't talk to each other.
He throws his steering wheel out into the gravel in disgust. And I think Rosberg did admit that he saw Lewis coming. So, yeah, I do agree with you that it was a little bit cynical, shall we say. But Lewis, why did he go for that inside?
Because otherwise he'd have had to have stopped. Here's my justification. The only way to not crash then was to go right on a straight. I have to check up because Rosberg has been slower and mucked up his engine modes. I can understand like making a defensive play, But if Hamilton wasn't alongside and Rosberg moved all the way to the right, then Hamilton could have come back to the left. But he couldn't, because there was literally Rosberg to his left. I can't believe we're having an argument about this 8 years later. But he couldn't change direction by that time because he was already pinned by Rosberg, and then Rosberg carries on to the edge of the track. Had there been no overlap at all, Hamilton could have just come back to the left. But you can't expect people on a straight to stop dead and just to completely check up and brake.
No, absolutely. And that's where airplane crashes happen. I totally agree with you.
Oh my God, it's 2016 again. Oh, I hope all the elections go my way. All right, sorry, carry on. That was a lovely diversion.
No, it's good. Well, why don't we move on to Austria then? If we're in the mood for a fight, why don't we move on to the Austria moves? So this is again where Nico starts to get his elbows out because he's at the end of the race, he's on less good tyres than Lewis is. Lewis is on a different strategy and he's catching up right towards the end. So up the hill, there's a slight left kink before that really heavy stop to go to the right. And Rosberg defends the inside and Lewis has an overlap on the outside. So again, Lewis is ahead. By today's racing rules, he's ahead at the
apex and can run him off,
and the apex.
And can just run him off. Yeah.
Which Rosberg essentially tries to do. But this was in the days, I think, before that was actually allowed. But I think Rosberg essentially broke too late. He kept the steering wheel perfectly straight right until the point where he would have gone off if he didn't turn. But by that point, of course, Lewis had zero place to go.
Well, and Lewis was doing what I was begging Rosberg to do. He just said, well, I'm not going to jump off track. I'm just going to stay on track then. If you want to hit me, hit me.
Exactly. But although you're not making a case that Rosberg had to make the apex, are you?
No, not at all. So I actually think this was a key one for me in my F1 education and racing rules, because your initial instinct is, well, why didn't he go to the apex? And it's the same thing people were saying with Hamilton, Silverstone 2021. Exactly. And you go, oh, no. The inside car can turn whenever the inside car wants to turn. There's no obligation for the car. The car on the outside can't turn into the corner until there's not a car there in the way.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's like a block pass. But I would have thought, and I think the steward's decision bore this out, I would have thought, though, there comes a point where you still need to leave them enough space to complete the racing manoeuvre. And that's what Rosberg did not do. Rosberg wanted Hamilton to jump out of the way or hit the brakes.
Exactly. He got a 10-second penalty for doing exactly that. There was no way that the both of them were making that corner, and Rosberg made absolutely sure of that. I do applaud the aggression and that intent to stand up to Hamilton.
Good times, man. Good times. Yeah.
As you say, it made that era so interesting. I wish that in some of these other battles that there was a decent enough teammate to take it to them. And then, of course, we come to the finale in Abu Dhabi, where, as you said, Rosberg has to finish. So he has to finish in third behind Lewis, who finishes in first. So Rosberg is currently second with Hamilton leading.
Oh, so for Hamilton to win, Rosberg had to lose that second place,
Exactly. So he's backing him up into Vettel, who's chasing in the Ferrari. And there's no incident here, but was it fair? It's a very interesting debate. And of course, it's happened multiple times since. Perez did it to Hamilton.
But Hamilton didn't get a penalty for that.
No,
there was just a lot of people saying that it was unsporting. So basically, you can either complain about Hamilton doing that, but then you have to complain about Perez doing it in 21 as well. I thought both were fine. It's that whole thing of like, well, I don't have to accelerate out of the corner. I can just linger.
It was Alan Prost who said that you have to win a F1 race in the slowest time possible, and Lewis took that to an extreme, I think.
Oh my goodness,
absolutely. Why not back your team, back your rival up? So because if you can't do anything about it by overtaking him, you've got to make sure someone else can overtake him. So and he didn't do it in a way which was like Alonso did to Russell, where you're doing it unpredictably. Do you remember Alonso at the last lap of the Australian Grand Prix? Checked up in that really fast right-hander, and Russell ended up upside down in the middle of the track.
So I think neither Perez or Hamilton did brake checks to do that. They were making it themselves difficult to follow. They were making it difficult to pick up the acceleration. Alonso just parking it on the apex, and Russell suddenly seeing him. I don't know. That was not the same. So no, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And I appreciate when there's a little bit of chess having to go on. What was unlucky for Hamilton was it was Vettel behind, and Vettel went, well, I'm not getting involved in that. Nothing to do with me. If it had been some up and coming, if that had been Colapinto behind in P3, Colapinto would have gone, woohoo, send, and gone for it. But Vettel just went, there's no reason for me to get involved.
Exactly. The last thing I want to talk about before we end on 2016 is Lewis's poor starts. Now, regardless of whether he had reliability problems or not, this could have sealed the title for Hamilton, whichever way you look at it. So prior to 2015, you could use twin clutches, like Danny does on the iRacing, where you've got the two clutch pedals behind. You could find the bite point with one and then release the other one so that you can get the best start possible. So they thought, right, let's change that rule for 2016. So you have to use a single clutch with one hand only. And I think this is why Lewis now has his hand over the top of the steering wheel, because he's found a way to do this properly. But in that first season of that rule, he could not get the hang of it. And he lost, I've worked out, in 4 different races, he lost about 27 points from 4 poor starts. So in Australia, he started on pole position and Rosberg started second. By the end of lap 1, he was 6th. Right?
Poor.
So then so Lewis claws it back to get second, right? So he loses 7 points there.
This is all at the start of the season, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Bahrain, well, not all at the start. So Bahrain, again, starts first, Rosberg second. He's 9th by the end of lap 1. And this is because in Bahrain, he fell back only to second, but he put himself in a position where Bottas then clattered into the back of him and turned him round. So he lost a lot of time there. Again, he claws his way back to 3rd, so he loses 10 points there. In Italy, he starts in first. So this is later in the season. First and second start again. End of lap 1, he's 6th because he just bogs down off the starts, get a terrible start. So again, another 7-point loss. And in Japan, starts second. End of lap 1, he's 8th. So, you're getting...
And all of that time, Rosberg didn't make any of those.
Exactly. He finished first in every single one of those races because, as you rightly said, if you start at the front and you get away cleanly, those 2 Mercedes were away, right? But if he was having to claw his way back through, it wasn't as simple. So, he lost a lot of points there where Rosberg got on top of the system and Lewis didn't. And it took him the whole season to get back on it.
There was also a race. Wasn't this the season where they tried banning radio communications from the pit wall? And definitely Hamilton seemed to struggle with that more than Rosberg. So I wonder if there was some results that were affected by that.
Well, I would maybe, but the definite one is, so we talked a little bit about this earlier on with the gearbox issue at Silverstone for Rosberg, where he couldn't use 7th gear, but he didn't work that out. The team radioed him and said, don't use 7th gear because the gearbox is failing. Now they decided to give him a penalty for that because that was against the contravening that sporting regulation. The fallout from that meant that they scrapped that rule the next race. So Rosberg gets a penalty, drops behind Verstappen, loses points for the championship, and then they go, oh, that was a silly thing to have done. Let's get rid of that rule mid-season. So actually, I classify that as a win for Rosberg, not for Hamilton.
Fair enough. One of the all-time greatest radio messages was Hamilton not being able to find the engine mode to clear an error. And they were like, we can't tell you, Lewis. And he's, right, fine, I'll just start pressing every button. They were like, no, don't do that. So they both of them, I think, moved into a different engine mode. And then Rosberg, they had the error. Rosberg just went, well, I'll just go back to the one that I had before. And that cleared it. Whereas Hamilton wasn't in that same situation and didn't have a clue how it's correct. I'll just start pressing everything then. Yeah, no, that was a very silly rule, wasn't it, in these modern cars? What they should have said was have a distinct rule for driver coaching. Now, I wouldn't have minded that. So maybe you don't get to tell a driver, oh, well, we can see from the telemetry you need to start braking later into turn whatever. You need to fuel save now. I don't know. Maybe coaching would have been a different one.
I think that would have been a better way to go about it, rather, because as you say, because it was people like John Watson who were calling for the ban on the radio communications, saying, oh, they should just be able to drive. They didn't have that information back in my day. Yeah, but back in your day, there was a steering wheel and 2 pedals. Yeah. Nowadays, there's a whole supercomputer in front of you with various menus and thousands of different options.
Okay, so I have to say, you have moved the needle for me on just out and out. Oh, Hamilton was completely robbed because Rosberg did a lot of great things in this season. I think it was desperately unlucky with Hamilton. Without a big swathe of bad luck, he's champion in 2016. But when you look at what Rosberg did, I mean, he did start doing what I wanted him to do, which is be uncompromising, close the gap illegally in Spain and wipe out Hamilton and then attempt to hold his ground in Austria and get under his skin. I don't quite buy into, he got under him psychologically. Do you know, what was he doing? Was he sending letters to his friends saying, Lewis told your secrets to Jeff? I'm not so sure any of that really happened.
They were saying that he withheld information in briefings, that sort of stuff. But, that's fairly regular stuff, I think. And other stories are, he did training with psychologists and that sort of stuff to make himself better. He lost weight in the summer break on his legs by not going cycling so that he could be that little bit quicker, because you'd lose some weight. So you lose a bit of, you gain a bit of time. But as you say, all of these things are very marginal. And you're right in that there's a lot of...
And Lewis Hamilton wasn't training as well. Lewis Hamilton wasn't managing his weight. Yeah. So
exactly. I think these things are over-egged.
I think a lot of it has been made of that. And I think if you put Lewis Hamilton and Nico Rosberg in 7 seasons together, he's good. Rosberg is good enough to win one anyway. So that's why I wasn't sort of like, it's a bit of bad luck. But I wasn't, 2021ing it.
Yeah. I think if you put Bottas in that car in 2016, I don't think he wins.
No, I mean, that's fair.
A lot of drivers in that car in 2016, I don't think they win. I think Rosberg was of that caliber that he could capitalize when Lewis wasn't having a good time. And he threw everything into that season and was like, at the end of it, going, I'm spent, I'm out, I'm done.
But let's say we're correct that, you give them 10 seasons in there, maybe Rosberg wins 1, maybe 2. I think maybe 2.
Yeah, maybe
1 or 2, right? And then that has come up and you go, it's happened. Yeah, I've had a stroke of luck there, but you know what? I've done everything else. I've fought and clawed. I've done everything I needed to do, and I've won it. What's the chances that in the next 6 seasons of the not winning seasons, I think it's not a decision, the decision to retire after that. It's not a decision I think you can overly criticize. Almost disappointing, for sure, and a little bit like, you're not going to give him a shot again to claw back at you. If you did that round your friend's house with like a game of pool or whatever, and you won 3, they won 3 games, and then you nicked one because they potted the black, and then you went, right, I'm going home now, and also I'm never playing you again.
Exactly. You snap the cue. I've done the Van Gene. Yeah. No, you snap the cue over your knee and go, right, I'm out. See you later, guys. Yeah, you can't do that. But
we should clarify that doing the Van Gene is hitting your mic, not not snapping the pool cue and going home. Yeah, go on.
No, exactly. Yeah. But yeah, so for our listeners here, Spanners, a pop quiz. So, who was the last champion to retire after they won the title? And can you name as many of them as possible? Because there was a
bunch.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
F1 drivers that retired after winning a title.
Yeah, or didn't defend their title. They might have come back later, but they retired after.
Oh, okay. So mentally checked out doesn't count. So going to Arrows doesn't count.
No, I'm afraid not. The slow decline of Arrows and Jordan doesn't count.
Right. Well, none of them are recent. Surely, nope. None of them are recent. Okay, so we're going into
Rosberg was the most recent.
The depths of the 70s. So I can't name them.
There were 2 that you should know because they're in we've talked about them both already.
Did Schumacher retire after 2005? No,
he retired 2006, but he hadn't won in 05 and 06.
2 seasons because that was Alonso.
Yeah. We were talking about how badly Williams treated their drivers in the 90s. There's a clue for you.
Yeah, but Hill got moved on to Arrows, but it wasn't the following season.
No, so it was. Yeah, so that's fine. He went to Arrows.
Well, then I
go
don't
further
know.
back.
Then I don't know. I don't know.
No,
Prost?
Alan Prost, 93, and our Nige. Don't forget. So Nigel, Alan Prost, they both switched to different disciplines or retired completely after their titles. We had Jackie Stewart as well, Jochen Rindt, who unfortunately passed away during practice for Monza in his season that he won, Mike Hawthorne and Fangio. So they all retired after winning.
Wow.
So there you go.
This has been a lovely... I hope no one minds that we went on meandering conversations and ended up... Honestly, you transported me back to those 2016 arguments immediately. I like that. I like the framework of looking back at a driver's career as an excuse to look at an era of Formula One. However, I really am trying to clamp down on this 1 hour. I don't want to go over an hour except on a race review. Perhaps, maybe in the future. We've never done it before. but I'm starting to think of toying with it for the race reviews. But since we are at exactly 59 minutes and 59 seconds, Catman, I will tell everyone to go and follow you on Twitter at CatmanF1. If you need veterinary advice, what's your hourly rate these days? 4,000? 4,000 an hour. I can't. Yeah, that's fine. So just leave that to the Missed Apex crew to blindly panic and call Catman in the middle of the night. My cat has an owie, but he's a very nice chap and he knows a lot about the history of F1. And I think you even researched and stuff, which I consider cheating. I
might have done. I was like Rosberg. I put a lot of effort into proving that he was the GOAT of one-time champions.
I have to admit, you've moved the needle for me. So put in the comments, is Nico Rosberg the greatest one-time world champion? We will do this again. Any ideas who might be the next driver?
Oh, we got loads of options. Maybe put those in the comments. We've got people like, let's go for Pastor Maldonado, whoever you want. We could do the villains of F1. Who knows?
We can combine two little ones as well. They don't all have to take up the full hour. Catman, thank you. Until we see you next, work hard, be kind, and have fun. This was Missed Apex Podcast.